are Cheryl Reeve, the head coach of the Minnesota Lynx. That is an irresponsible thing to do. You are a coach for a female basketball team. Do you not think that the females are being screwed over if they have to compete against an individual born as a male? What are you talking about?
Sophie Cunningham said something most Americans quietly agree with, and she got booed for it on her own court. A rival coach even showed up wearing a shirt designed just to needle her. That's the temperature of this fight right now. Martina Navratilova, Piers Morgan, and Megan Rapinoe all weighed in on the trans athletes in women's sports debate tonight, and they showed up with very different numbers. Is this about protecting girls, or is it about pushing trans kids out of sports? We're going through every claim on both sides tonight to see which ones actually hold up.
I said what I said. I think it's kind of common sense. And I think I'll always believe in that. I think it's really important to protect children. And that's little girls who are also involved in that category. And so I stand on what I said.
Sophie Cunningham isn't backing down, and good for her. She calls this common sense, protecting girls, and doesn't dress it up any more than that. But notice what's baked into that word, protect. It only works if letting trans athletes compete against girls actually puts those girls at some kind of risk. Cunningham doesn't spell out why that's true here. She just states it as obvious. Now, obvious isn't the same as proven. The rest of this hour is going to spend a lot of time trying to prove exactly that point, with real numbers and real comparisons. So, hold on to this. Common sense is a fine starting instinct. It's not a finishing argument. Let's see if the evidence actually gets her there.
Well, the cost of Sophie Cunningham's common sense has been raucous booing and heckling from crowds at her games. A rival coach smugly wore a trans-branded T-shirt. Pundits say Cunningham should shut up and dribble, a position they rarely take about the many stars who echo their politics. Perhaps the most sane commentary from the world of sport has come from Stephen A. Smith, who wrote, "You can support people's rights and believe biological men shouldn't compete in women's sports. These two things are not mutually exclusive. Common sense still matters. That is where I stand."
Piers points to something real. Cunningham got booed, got heckled, and a rival coach even wore a trans-branded shirt at her just to make a point. That's not normal sports rivalry. That's a message. And Stephen A. Smith's line lands clean. You can support trans people and still think biological men shouldn't play women's sports. Those aren't contradictory positions. They're just two different questions. Where Piers gets shakier is the bigger claim that stick to sports only ever gets aimed at athletes who lean one way politically. Turns out that's not really true. Laura Ingraham told LeBron James to shut up and dribble for going after Trump. Conservative athletes like Aubrey Huff and Harrison Butker have caught the exact same stay in your lane treatment from the left for saying what they believe. So the tactic itself isn't a one-sided weapon. It gets used by both teams when they don't like what an athlete is saying. What is one-sided in this specific case is how hard Cunningham got hit for a position most Americans actually agree with. That's the real story here, not some grand unified theory about who's allowed to talk.
Yeah, and as I always say in this debate, there is a reason that we separate the sexes in the Olympics. And the reason is that if we made it gender neutral, then women, biological females, would end up winning barely any medal. And therefore the Olympics would just disintegrate and be destroyed. At your peak, Martina, when you were the best women's tennis player in the world, what number of men would you have beaten? Like, would you have beaten anyone in the top 500 men, top 1,000? What do you think?
Maybe. It's about 500 might be the level at this point. I mean, the power is, it takes so much less power for them to hit the ball just as hard as I do, which means to hit it harder at the level that I'm using, they can hit it so much harder and have that much more control and have that much harder ball. And they've moved that much faster and then jump that much higher. And by the way, they have 5 inches of height advantage on average. And then with your reach, you got probably 7 inches. So I have to jump 7 inches higher to hit the same ball as the guy. So you just can't make up for that. And most sports are very fast twitch and explosive, and strength matters. And so maybe 500, maybe I'd have a chance, maybe win a set, maybe win the match. But if we do it over and over and over, the guy just takes that much less effort to hit the same shot. So at the end, it's a losing effort. I don't know what the cutoff is, but that's not the point. That's not the point. There's over 1,000 boys under 15 that have run faster 100 meters than Florence Griffith Jr., who still owns the record in 100 meters. So we have no chance.
Martina Navratilova doesn't do vague. She puts numbers on the table. Men average something like 5 inches taller and have 7 inches more reach, and that's before you get to raw force production, with the same effort producing a harder hit and a faster stride. Check the data, and the basic shape of that claim holds up. The average height and reach gap between male and female athletes is well documented, not a made-up talking point. Where it gets fuzzier is the specific numbers she leans on for effect. The claim that over 1,000 boys under 15 have run the 100 meters faster than Flojo's world record, the broader pattern is real. Plenty of teenage boys now beat the fastest woman who ever lived, but that exact count of 1,000 doesn't trace back to any dataset anybody can point to. Same with her line about maybe beating a man ranked 500th in the world. Nobody can find where that number actually comes from. Here's the thing, though. The core argument doesn't need the exact number to be right. It needs the gap to be real, and the gap is real. Sloppy specifics don't sink a true premise. They just give critics something cheap to grab onto instead of arguing the actual point.
Yeah, and the advantage is not because it's a biological man. It's because of the puberty that person went through. So we will have transgender girls who haven't gone through puberty yet. We will have transgender adults who transgender female adults who didn't go through a male puberty. We will have transgender female adults who don't have testosterone as their hormone. We will have transgender female adults who are not taller than average, like Sophie Cunningham is. And we will have transgender female adults who've never had a scrap of testosterone in their life. So we need to be really careful what we are discriminating against. What is the category? Is it height? Is it shoe size? Is it muscle? Is it lung
biology.
capacity?
Helen Webby makes the smartest version of the other side's case in this whole episode. She's not denying biology, she's narrowing it. Her point is that the real edge comes from going through male puberty specifically, not from some blanket label of biological man. A trans girl who transitions before puberty, who's never had the testosterone exposure, who isn't taller than average, does she really carry the same advantage as a fully male puberty athlete? That's a fair question, and it deserves a real answer instead of a dodge. But look at what she's actually proposing as the fix. Instead of one clear rule, sex-based categories, she wants case-by-case review of testosterone history, bone structure, and muscle mass on a kid-by-kid basis, sport by sport, meet by meet. That's not a workable policy. That's a full-time medical review board for every locker room in the country. And even if you built it, you haven't actually escaped the advantage question. You've just moved it inside a spreadsheet. The category rule exists precisely because you can't run individualized biology tests on every 15-year-old before every track meet. Her diagnosis is careful. Her prescription falls apart the second you try to actually run it.
Manners, if you don't mind, okay? You love yourself, your T-shirt says. Love your other panelists. Give them time to speak. Helen, Helen, my question would be this: we just had the men's World Cup football, okay, soccer in America. How many women do you think would get into any of those World Cup teams? Men's.
Are you asking me? So I'm not sure what the question is. How many women would get into a male team?
How many professional women's football players, soccer players, would get into any of the men's 48 World Cup teams?
But the advantage is not their sex or their gender. It's the puberty they've gone through.
How many? Well, okay. If there's no advantage, how many women would get into any of those teams? Give me a number.
I can't give you a number. How can I possibly give you that number? Okay, I shall say
You know the number.
I'll say
You
zero.
know the number.
I'll
The
say zero
number.
to please you.
The
But that's not
number is a
I
big
gave you a
Helen.
number.
Helen,
I gave
the
you a
number is a big fat zero. You know
Yeah,
why?
I just gave you
Because
that
the
number.
women aren't as strong, aren't as powerful,
Piers.
aren't as fast. Jeff,
But
this
you
is
wanna talk
basic
about
biology,
somebody who-
Jeff.
Do you want to
They're
talk
denying
about somebody
science.
Andrea, your name's not Jeff.
Right? You're talking about Julie,
Andrea,
right? No,
your
because
name's not Jeff.
You said I know because I talked before Jeff. I started talking before Jeff. Let me finish my point. You talked about Julie Tétart, right? In the last example, right? Julie Tétart is in the second league for France, right? Averaging 20-9. I'm not sure if you know right now, I am in Seattle, right? Seattle Storm fan. Guess what? There's somebody who is in the Premier League in the Australia League, not the second league, but the Premier League, and Mackenzie Holmes. Mackenzie Holmes is averaging 20-9. What is she averaging right now in the WNBA? 3 points and 3 rebounds. So how is Julie Tétart, who's not even averaging 20-9 in the most premier league in France, supposed to dominate against somebody like Asia Wilson when Mackenzie Holmes can't even do that right now, currently in the league as one of the NCAA favorites in Australia? You are making mountains out of molehills and supposing something that does not exist.
Piers swings back with soccer, and the real world backs him up more than people expect. In 2017, the reigning world champion US women's national team lost 5-2 in a scrimmage to a boys' under-15 academy squad. Carly Lloyd herself admitted it years later. Bigger, stronger, faster, her words. That's not a cherry-picked stat. That's the actual champions of the world losing to teenagers. The exact 0 of the 48 World Cup teams line, though, isn't a real number anybody tracked. That's Piers doing math in his head for effect. Fine, rhetoric happens on live TV. But here's the actual problem with using this as his answer to Helen. She wasn't arguing that men in general are faster than women in general. Nobody disputes that. She was making a narrower claim that the advantage tracks male puberty specifically, not the sex category as a whole. Grown adult women against teenage boys who've already been through puberty doesn't test that claim at all. It just restates the broad gap everyone already agreed on. Piers wins the headline. He doesn't actually close the gap in Helen's argument. The broader case survives fine without this exchange. But this particular volley was a miss, not a knockout.
They're using this as a wedge issue because we love sports and, we don't want our little girls to be unsafe in sports. And it's like, unsafe from who? But okay.
Yeah.
But now we're using this as like an overarching thing when really what we're attacking women. We're saying, if you look like this as a woman, you can play. If you look like this as a woman, there's a bill in Washington happening right now that's going to require all girls, just like full stop, to go through a sex test, an invasive, examining their genitals to see if they're a woman.
Yeah.
And that has not worked out well historically for people to do
we
that.
know what that means. Black girls are going to get questioned more, and they're going to get questioned first. Who's doing the examination?
Who wants to subject themselves to
Yeah,
that?
and so they're going to see a pullback. They don't like women in sports because it helps us with confidence and power, and we see so many women in the C-suite played elite level sports. It's just great for you physically and all of it, but it's an attack on women in society.
Megan Rapinoe says the Washington bill requires genital exams for every girl who wants to play sports. Check the actual bill text, and that's not quite right. It gives schools 3 legal ways to verify sex. A doctor's note based on anatomy, genetics, or hormone levels, and it lets the family and provider pick which one. So, requires is the wrong word. Nobody's forced into an exam room by the letter of the law. But before anyone celebrates too fast, look at the other side of this. A genital exam is one of the 3 legal options. No lab needed, which makes it the cheapest and easiest one for a school district without money for genetic testing. So, the version of this bill that shows up in the real world in an underfunded district could absolutely end up being the exam Rapinoe describes. She got the legal language wrong. She may still be right about what actually happens on the ground. That's the distinction worth making, and neither side in this fight seems interested in making it.
I mean, aside from the fact she's factually wrong about the genital exams, Washington Initiative only requires a doctor's signed certificate of biological sex using reproductive anatomy, genetic makeup, or testosterone levels. A cheek swab can determine sex. No genital exam is required. So she's wrong on fact about that. But this idea that keeping biological men out of women's sports, Martina, is an attack on women in society. What's your message to...
Piers goes further than just correcting Rapinoe. He says the bill only requires something as simple as a cheek swab. That's its own overcorrection. The bill puts a genital exam on the same legal footing as a cheek swab. 3 options, equally valid, provider's choice. Piers isn't lying. He's just picking the friendliest of the 3 options and presenting it like it's the only one on the menu. Rapinoe made the bill sound worse than the text says. Piers made it sound gentler than the text allows. Both of them are quoting the same 3 words: anatomy, genetics, testosterone, and both are only telling you the one that helps their side. If you actually want to know what this bill does, you have to read past both of these clips.
Well, if you think Megan Rapinoe is basically full of crap, then get ready to see the toilet with me, because I feel like the entire premises, in my opinion, is transphobic. Because if you look at participation, right, in the top level, high level sports, right, there are over 500,000 people who are participating in NCAA sports. How many people of those people are trans athletes? Only 10. Right? So you're extrapolating 10 people out of a population of 500,000 people and focusing on them as if they are the problem, an overwhelming problem of the sports field when it comes to the threat of women, when that is not the case, right? You say that you are concerned about biological men competing in the game of any sport, right? Whether it be basketball, whether it be soccer, anything of the sort. Why are we assuming that the process of becoming a trans person, whether it be a trans woman or a trans male, is as simple as putting on a wig and just deciding to change your pronouns? That is simply not the case, right? People who are trans go through a process years over years of going through hormonal therapy, of going through support for their mental therapy as well, going through support of changing their pronouns through official means. They go through a process in which they determine whether or not they feel like they are internally a male or a woman. It is not as simple as just deciding to become an athlete. I feel like the premise of this conversation is just...
Andrea's number checks out. NCAA President Charlie Baker told a Senate panel himself, fewer than 10 transgender athletes out of roughly 500,000. That's real on the record, not a made-up talking point. But watch the move she makes with that number. 10 out of 500,000 sounds like nothing when you say it about the entire NCAA. It sounds completely different when that one athlete is standing on the podium in your daughter's specific event in her specific division, taking the one spot that would have gone to her. A national average doesn't tell you anything about what happens inside a single race, a single weight class, or a single scholarship slot. That's where the actual competition happens, not in a spreadsheet of 500,000 names. Andrea's math is accurate. Her conclusion, that the small number makes this a non-issue, doesn't follow from it.
That's my question.
Well,
Anyway,
actually,
question should be where are these-
Well, hang on. The United Nations, actually, for, I think, 2024, calculated that nearly 1,000 medals at all levels of sport globally have been deprived from female athletes by trans women athletes. Nearly 1,000. So when you say it's a tiny problem, it doesn't affect it. That's 1,000 actual women or girls who've lost out on medals by competing. Out of how many?
Piers counters Andrea with a number of his own. Close to 1,000 medals lost to trans athletes worldwide, and he's citing a real report. The UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women did put out exactly that figure in 2024, more than 890 medals across hundreds of competitions. That part is real. It's not invented. But this is where I have to be straight with you instead of just running with the number because it helps the argument. Reporters who've dug into where that list actually comes from found that it traces back to a tally kept on an anonymous website, not an audited sporting body record. And that list has reportedly included athletes who aren't even transgender, like boxer Imane Khelif, plus results from things like competitive poker. The rapporteur behind the report has also been open for years about opposing trans participation in women's sports, before this report ever came out. None of that proves the number is wrong. It means credible people are genuinely fighting over whether it's right. And I'm not going to hand you false certainty just because the fight is loud. What I will say is this. You don't actually need the exact number to be 900 for the underlying point to matter. Real women in real competitions have lost real medals to male-bodied competitors. Whether the final count is 900 or 90, the direction of the problem is the same.
It's funny that you talk about someone dying, because let me tell you a story. When I was in band, I saw somebody who had the word hate carved literally into their skin all across their forearm. A couple of years later, never asked them about that question, but a couple of years later, they came out as a trans man. I didn't understand what caused them to carve hate into their skin, but after finding out that they transitioned, it turns out that their discomfort in being in a body in which they were not comfortable in caused a big part of this. Let me speak.
I'm sorry, I have to cut in there. I have to cut in here. That is something else. Self-harm and suicide are very different. You can't just conflate that. This is the pro-trans person conflating self-harm.
Nobody is stopping them competing in sports.
20% social problems, right? So participation in sports can literally save lives because trans people
Nobody's stopping trans people competing in sports.
Yes, you guys are.
Andrea, nobody is stopping. Nobody is stopping trans people competing in sport.
Caring about the thoughts of people like the person in band who carved hate into their skin, and then by
they did it to themselves.
Was able to find love in themselves, like I have on this shirt. You are attacking people and also causing people to be suicidal. So my question to you is, you say me trying to make sure that people are all equal and can have participation in community is killing people. I would say and argue that by you excluding them, you increase the race, and actually there is evidence.
But you see, this is the problem.
That matches their biological sex.
Andrea makes the hardest emotional case in the whole episode, and some of what backs it up is real. Trans people do show much higher rates of suicide attempts than the general population. That's in the peer-reviewed research, not a talking point. Trans youth who play on a sports team do show better mental health numbers than trans youth who don't. That's also backed by the research. The specific percentages she tosses out in the moment, though, don't trace back to any study anyone can find, so treat those as rough impressions, not exact figures. Her instinct that community and competition matter for a struggling kid isn't wrong. But watch what she does with that true premise. She uses an anecdote about a bandmate's self-harm to build towards suicide risk, and then stretches that into an argument against restricting which category someone competes in specifically. The research on sports and trans mental health compares kids who play against kids who don't play at all. It does not test what happens to a trans athlete who still gets to play, still gets a team, the locker room, the bus rides, and the trophy at the end of the season, just in the category that matches their biological sex. Nobody in this debate, including the Bill Piers and Rapinoe were fighting over earlier, is talking about banning trans kids from sports. They're talking about which box they check on the roster. Andrea's evidence supports keeping trans kids in sports. It doesn't support the specific fight she's using it to win.
I have to cut in there. I have to cut in here. That is something else. Self-harm and suicide are very different. You can't just conflate that. This is the pro-trans person conflating self-harm.
Nobody is stopping them competing in sports.
20% social problems, right? So participation in sports can literally save lives because trans people
Nobody's stopping trans people competing in sports.
Yes, you guys are.
Andrea, Andrea,
they're not.
nobody is stopping. Nobody is stopping trans people competing in sport.
Caring about the thoughts of people like the person in band who carved hate into their skin, and then by
they
going
did it
through
to
a transition
themselves.
was able
They did
to
it.
find love in themselves, like I have on this shirt. You are attacking people and also causing people to be suicidal. So my question to you is, you say me trying to make sure that people are all equal and can have participation in community is killing people. I would say and argue that by you excluding them, you increase the race, and actually there is evidence.
They can
but you see, this is the problem.
That
Okay.
matches their biological sex. They can play in their sport. They can play sports.
There's a 10% to
all anybody's asking for
in suicidal thoughts by trans people. So live with that.
They can play.
Yeah, you know what? It's fancy words, Andrea, but the reality is nobody is saying trans people can't play sport. They're just saying you play sport against your biological sex because that is where the advantage or disadvantage lies. Exactly. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all very much.
Jeff cuts right through it. Self-harm and suicide are not the same thing. And stacking one anecdote about a friend's self-harm on top of a national suicide statistic doesn't make for a clean argument. It makes for an emotional one. He's right to call that out plainly, and his second point is the one that's been sitting underneath this entire debate the whole time. Nobody on this panel, not Piers, not the Washington bill, not a single voice arguing for these restrictions, has said trans kids should be banned from playing sports. The actual ask is much narrower. Compete in the category that matches your biological sex, the category where the physical variables everyone spent the last 40 minutes measuring, height, reach, puberty, testosterone, actually line up. That's not exclusion. That's just what a fair category is supposed to mean. Strip away the exaggerated framing on both sides tonight, and what's left underneath is a pretty simple, defensible position. Compete with your own biology. That's it. That's the whole ask. So, where does this actually land? The core physical case holds up. Men have real, measurable advantages in height, reach, and force. And even without the flashiest numbers, the basic pattern behind Navratilova's point checks out. The fewer than 10 out of 500,000 number Andrea used is accurate. But that math only tells you about the whole country, not about the one girl standing on the podium who lost her spot. The medal count Piers threw out is real too, but it's disputed, so we're not going to pretend it's settled science when it isn't. What isn't disputed is the direction. Real women have lost real spots to male-bodied competitors. Helen Webby made the smartest case for the other side tonight, that the real advantage comes from male puberty specifically, not the label alone. That's a fair point, and it deserves credit. But her fix, individual testing on every kid before every meet, isn't something you can actually run in the real world. Rapinoe and Piers both quoted the same bill and both left out the part that hurt their own argument. So, if you only watched one clip today, you got played by somebody. And Andrea's case, the one built on real pain, real suicide risk, and real mental health data, is not actually an argument against what's being proposed here. Because nobody on this panel, nobody in that bill, is talking about banning trans kids from sports. The whole fight comes down to one line. Compete with your own biology. That's not exclusion. That's just what a fair category means, and by the end of tonight, that's the only position left standing. If you want more breakdowns that hold the line like this, please subscribe and like the video.